I feel that I'm amongst a lot of friends. So I'm going to, from my 4-H days, I learned you tell people what you're going to talk about, then you do the talk, and then you summarize it at the end. My summary is going to be you're asking me questions, and as I'm going, if I say something that A is not historically correct, you can correct me. Or if you think I'm embellishing it wrong, you can try to correct me, but I may not change my opinion. If it's really going to be embarrassing to me, just wait and talk to me afterwards. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my growing up and my family and what got me here. And then I'm going to talk about farming and my recollection of what has happened since I was born in '44, and so I don't really have real clear memories until early '50s, and probably you'll find out that I don't have clear memories of in between either. But so I was born I was the 5th generation to be living on my farm. My ancestors came from Western Germany in 1856, and as near as the records indicate, it was probably because of the conscription that they had there for being in the army or whatever civil strife they were having. A lot of the people from Woodbury came from that part of Germany, and so how they actually ended up on the 80 acres that we farmed, I don't really know. All my life I said they must have had rocks in Germany, and therefore they wanted to stay to that kind of farms. But oak trees, so they knew the ground was good, and they could have gone a little bit further to the east, where the rocks weren't, where East Ridge High School is. There are no rocks there. And that was just 1.5 miles from ours. And where East Ridge High School is, that used to actually be part of the Schilling farm. And we sold that about 30 years ago. Betty and I, my wife is sitting right over here, we thought that $1,000 an acre, we could not imagine $80,000 going into debt. And the family wanted to sell it at the time, and the rest is history, I guess. So I do know that my grandfather was a dairy farmer, because the barn that we had on the farm, my grandfather actually did milk cows in, but the barn was mostly devoted to, or half of it, to horses, and the other half with cows. My father went to school right next to the farm on District 28 on Bailey Road. And at this point, I'm going to start passing this around. So this is the township, the city of Woodbury, and our farm is right here where the blue mark is, and you can sort of pass it around, and that'll give you some idea. That was the home farm. So I'll get back to the school, but I went to school at this one-room school on District 28 on Bailey Road. Consolidation happened in somebody else can probably help me, 54, 56. I was in 2nd grade. 3rd grade, I went to Newport. Junior high, came down here to the junior high down here, and then graduated from St. Paul Park with class A. Behind you?
We were 61.
Yeah, I was 62. From there, I went to River Falls, and I got my degree in agriculture and chemistry. Now, I do remember what the formula for salt is. But if you ask me any more specific questions about chemistry, I'm not so sure I could answer them correctly. From there, I joined the Peace Corps. I had met Betty at school. She was a year behind me. She joined the Peace Corps a year later, and we were married in Venezuela. I was part of a group that had their training in Puerto Rico for about 2 months, learning Spanish and learning about what we were going to be doing. My group had 28 people in it. There were 2 other people who had grown up on a farm. A number of people, good friend Steve grew up in New York City, had never been on an American farm, and was still in an agriculture program. Sometimes things like that happen. So my emphasis was in helping co-ops and a thing they called community development, which was basically anything else you wanted to do to help the community. So I arrive in this community, and they are very proud to show me a combine that they had gotten as a co-op 2 years before. It was made in Poland. They showed me the manual, which was written in Polish, and I had no idea except that you should keep the belts tight and you should oil the chains. And they thought I was the greatest thing since they had gotten the combine. So as a co-op, 2 years before, they had taken out this big loan for a tractor and a wagon and a seeder of rice, which I had never seen rice growing in my life. And they, so they had gotten like an equivalent of $80,000 as a loan. They had a very good harvest. They sold the product, and the president, vice president, and the treasurer said, let's pay off our loan, eliminate the interest, and we'll be great. The problem was that there were 30 people in the co-op. They did that, and there was no money to give to the rest of the members. And they had devoted, these were campesinos, small farmers that just had land out in the jungle, but they had devoted their time to raising this rice and did not take care of their gardens. So now they don't have the garden for food, and they don't have money to buy other things. So 27 of the people quit the co-op. This leaves the president, the vice president, treasurer in a really good position, if you can imagine, and arrived this American who's supposed to work with the co-op. It was a struggle. So Betty came, we got married there, we came back home. She thought that she was marrying a person who was going to be in international agriculture. And I came home and decided I wanted to farm with my father. I liked farming with my father. It was a real privilege that not everyone has a chance to do. I thought a lot of that man. We have I call it homemade daughter and 2 adopted sons. The daughter lives in Arizona, the sons live in Mendota Heights, and we have 4 grandchildren. So that sort of wraps it up. I'll talk about retirement at the end. So farming, as I remember, early 50s, I was not really active. So there's a picture up here. I don't know, has this been circulated before, Herb? No. Okay, so this is not of our farm. I do not know these people. But I remember the first thrashing machine that was on our farm. The people that So they would go out and cut the grain. It would be put in bundles. They would be put together to dry out. Then you'd have a tractor or a horse team that would drive along slow, and you'd put those bundles on the wagon. You would take it to a stationary machine, which would then go and separate the grain from the straw, and the straw was blown on a pile. My father had a pig house, just a pole frame, that he put the straw on top of. And so the pigs could go in and out during the winter, and he would use off the straw pile in our barn. We had a barn that was built in 1920, and I'm going to talk about the Miller barn, but it's the same era. And at that time, one side of the barn was devoted to 15 cows. Then there were 4 horse stalls and a pen for the bull. Over the course of time, the horses disappeared when I was probably in 6th grade. And I remember that my dad said, so the last of the horses went today. And somebody had come out and butchered them on the farm and used them for whatever horse meat was used for in the mid-50s. Probably somebody has a better idea than myself what that was. The first tractor was an international, they called it an F-20. It preceded the M's and the H's and those. So it was about 30 horsepower, I think. And you had to crank it to get it started and have some luck doing that. And I found out at a very early age with this, the design of the tractor was what they called a tricycle. The wheels were close together in the front. Where East Ridge High School was, there was a pretty steep hill. It was a flat part of the farm that we owned at that time. And steep hill going down, and then you had to come back up when you got to Bailey Road. I found out that if you push the clutch in with a big load of hay, your tractor will really go fast. And in the back of your mind, when you're a young person and you're doing this, you think, if I let the clutch out, what's going to happen to the motor and the transmission? Not really understanding what you're all working with here. That was my first realization that I'm going to probably live a lucky life if I get through this. So back in the early 50s, we had what they called a general farm. We had milk cows, we had pigs, we had chickens. My mother talks about the geese, but I never remember the geese because she said that gander came up and pecked her one too many times. And it became part of our meals one night. And we had guinea hens. Any of you ever have any experience with guinea hens?
Yes.
They like to be on top of whatever the tallest place is. And they like to be a real good watchdog. That anytime you're outside of the house, they make their ungodly noise. And we had bantam chickens in the barn. It was not, the inspector told us we couldn't do that anymore. And certainly we had a dog and many cats.
You also had Muscovy duck.
We had what?
Muscovy duck.
We had Muscovy ducks that we raised. We had, from my grandfather, he had an apple orchard. My father continued it. And so I remember 3 apple orchards that we had on the farm. a lot of time was spent trimming apple trees, spraying apple trees, picking apples, selling apples. So it got to the point when my father retired from that, I said, I've had enough fun doing that. I'm not going to do that anymore. But a lot of experience going with my grandfather to the St. Paul City Market early in the morning and selling apples there, especially on Saturday mornings. A lot of the Bailey's nursery were, the Baileys were part of that outfit or the people that were there on Saturday mornings. And then if 10 o'clock rolls around and you still have X number of bushel of apples, you go to a store by the name of Eisenberg's, which was right close by there. And my father would trade apples for bananas. And my mother would say, now what do you do with a box of bananas like this? You know, all of them that were ripe yesterday. And so that was not an uncommon experience. We sold a lot of apples at the farm, either out of our garage or on Saturday and Sunday afternoons on Bailey Road. Bailey Road was not as busy as it is now, but that was part of the growing up. So as a dairy farm, my father farmed next door to Alvin Warnke. They were born a day apart, and they grew up together. And Alvin went to the two-year course at the University of Minnesota in agriculture. My father finished 8th grade and needed to help on the farm, and that was his extent of education. My father was very much of the belief that I will grease and I will have the equipment ready, but I will not have everything all the way along the steps 100% ready before I go cut my hay. And I will do it in a very timely manner. Now, Alvin had to have everything along the way, and this is a very good attribute, before you went and cut the hay, which meant that my father could get things done first, and then Alvin would be, but they shared equipment. They both milked about the same number of cows. But it wasn't, looking back, it was like, you know, the two different styles of doing things, and the frustration that my mother and my father had with their working partner, because they owned the combine together and they owned a number of things together. Anyway, back then, you would want to have the ground that you were planting looking black. There was no halfway in between. You would plow it in the fall or the spring. You would go and then take some kind of tool, a disc or a digger, and make it smooth and black. And then you would plant. And part of that was they didn't have herbicides in the early part of the 50s, 60s. So that was for weed control. But it was also learning that it really doesn't need to be black if you have herbicides. So you'd plant the small grain first. I remember that we planted some wheat. We planted barley that I would go with my father and take it up to Ham's Brewery in St. Paul. If it was that quality, if it wasn't, you would feed it either to the pigs or mix it in with for the cows or the chickens. We would go and take whatever grain we were going to grind, and we would take it up to Lake Elmo to have it ground. We did not have a feed grinder. So that was a process. Or to Old Cottage Grove, there was a feed mill there also. At that time, hay would be made by cutting it and letting it dry for 3 or maybe 4 days, and then you'd go and rake it together, and then you'd bale it. At first, my memory is with a wire tie bales. You would have somebody sit on the baler and actually push the wire through, and somebody would hand tie it. And then they came up with the wire came in a spool, and it would be automatically tied. Which made that, yes, you could put as much hay in that bale as a person could lift. They then went to twine, and that you had to stack, and you'd learn how to stack the hay so you didn't have to do it more than once on a load. Although that one that I took down the hill, I had to restack after I got stopped. And then I went to the luxury of having a thrower on my hay baler, and then I learned what chopped hay was all about, and really made life so much easier. I built 3 silos on the farm in the 80s, so I could cut it one day and chop it the next day, and I didn't have to look for that window in the end of June where it doesn't rain for 3 or 4 days. That does happen on a pretty regular basis, and farmers counted on that. So I can remember making 2 crops of hay a day, summer. Farmers now, 3 is very common. 4 is almost the majority of the farmers do that. And there is occasionally summers when you can actually get 5 cuttings. You have to do everything right, but so that's one of the transitions that I lived through. But certainly the idea of saying that it's too hard to stack the hay up in the barn, that you should really be the person down below, that was a good thing, because you didn't have to worry about stepping in a hole of the hay bales when you're up in the barn. I remember coming home from the Peace Corps and talking my father into planting corn that had a population of, as you plant it, at 12,000 seeds per acre. I wanted to go to 14,000. And my father said, well, if you want to have silage on all of your corn, because it's not going to get ripe, it's going to be too close together. It was a lengthy discussion, and he let me do part of the planting, and that was with a 2-row planter. Then I went to a 4-row planter, then a 6-row planter. I did not retire with anything more than a 6-row planter, but in South Washington County there are 24-row planters that are used by some of the farmers. So one of the many changes. When I stopped farming, I was planting at 36,000 plants per acre. So from 12 to 36. If you advertised that you had gotten 100 bushel an acre, people would think that you really are exaggerating something. This is in the 60s. There's many farmers the last 2 years that have gotten over 200 bushel an acre in South Washington County now. One of the changes. Haying, corn planting. Soybeans came on the picture about for South Washington County as a cash crop, early 60s. One of the problems is there weren't that many herbicides at first that you could control the weeds. And you planted at 40 inches wide. People know why you plant 40 inches wide rows? Any ideas? That's how wide the horse was. And so when you use cultivation to cut down on the weeds, the horse had to walk in between. Now, 30 is almost, it's almost a thing of the past. 20-inch rows and even narrower are used to get the higher production. So you started with soybeans. First combine that we used on our farm to harvest the soybeans was a combine that you pulled with the tractor. It had its own Wisconsin air-cooled engine that you cranked on, and it would take about 6 rows at a time. And if you got probably 8 or 10 acres done a day, you would say, boy, it was a good sunny afternoon. The combine that I last had was taking 20 feet of soybeans, and there's even combines in South Washington that take over 30 feet. The combine that I ended when I retired with had so many monitors on it, it would tell me exactly what the moisture of the soybeans was, that when I was harvesting, what the yield was, how much of the field I had left to go, and had GPS for driving, that I had to be there only so it didn't combine the neighbor's field. And if you did, you could easily do more than 50 acres a day, very easily. So the cows, when I started milking the barn, when we got rid of the horses, we converted that part of the barn over to another 10 cows. The last bull that we had on the farm was when I was a senior in high school, and I say that that bull was responsible for my not making it to the National MBA, because I was, it was the last day of Christmas vacation. We're putting the bull in, early sunset. The bull turned on me, did not attack me, but I fell over a frozen cow pie, broke my arm, and didn't play basketball. But I was really a water boy on the team, really. But anyway, so when I came back, my father was milking that barn, was milking 25 cows. I said that wasn't enough. So we went to the situation of milking 15 on one side, putting those cows outside while I was milking the other side. I have 2 brothers and a sister. The one brother was helping me on the farm, and he would put the first 15 cows outside, bring another 15 in, and that way I was milking 40 cows, 45 cows. We did that for many, many years. Question?
Did you milk by hand then?
I never milked more than 1 cow at a time, or never milked by hand more than 1 cow in my lifetime. Because waiting for the electricity to come on, I had purchased a generator to replace when the electricity was off. And only one time in my life did I have the generator hooked up, ready to engage it, and I noticed when I looked in the house, there was lights on in the house. And I said, maybe we have electricity. And so I never started the generator. The cows had been waiting for the electricity to come on. One thing you don't want to do, guys, don't have 45 women waiting for you. It's not a nice scene. You all know that already. So the production on, there was a family in the school, Gibbs. Mike Gibbs was in my class. He had a brother by the name of Gary, I think. And at one time,
Garland.
Pardon me?
Garland.
Marlon Gibbs?
Garland.
Garland.
Yeah.
Okay. There was an FFA chapter, and I was good friends with Mike. Garland came out and talked to my father about testing the production of cows. A new concept, not to the whole world, but for my father. From that testing, at first, if we had a cow that gave, well, it's 50 pounds. So basically 6 gallons a day, that was considered a pretty good cow. That was genetics, that was feed, and that was environment that they were under. So by doing this testing of butterfat and production over the course of the 50 years, I went from 50 pounds of milk a day to averaging pretty close to 100 pounds of milk a day. I went from the milking of the 30 cows originally to milking 90. In answer to your question, we in the old barn, I call it, built in 1920, we had buckets of milk that the milk was milked in buckets. We had what they called was a step saver that ran on vacuum. You dumped the milk into this stainless steel container, had a filter on it, and then it was taken by hose and put into the bulk tank. I can remember the system of bulk tanks came in late 50s here in this part of the world, where before they had the milk was put in cans and taken to the milk house, and the cans were generally submerged in water that came from the well that is at 45 degrees, and that's how the milk was kept cold every 2 days. Originally it was 4 or 5 farmers would go together and take a day of the week that they would be the person responsible to haul the milk to St. Paul. Up by Mounds Park there was a collection station, and so I never was really part of that, but I understood that happened when I was younger. Then there was, in fact, a person that the farmers hired to come to the farm and take the cans and put them up in a refrigerator or just a truck, and they would take them either to the collection station or to the processing plant. Most of the farmers, South Washington County, sold their milk to a co-op by the name of Twin City Milk Producers Association, TCMPA. It was one of the first milk co-ops that was organized in Minnesota, and it was by the progressive farmers that lived in this part of the world. Not only Woodbury, but more so Woodbury than Cottage Grove, simply because Cottage Grove was more, it was easier to farm, make bigger farms in Cottage Grove because of the land terrain. Then we went to what they called a bulk tank, and to go to sell your milk as grade A, you had to have a milk tank, big stainless steel thing. We started out with a 300-gallon tank, then we went to 500, then we went to 800, I think, and then we had 1,000, and there were times in between that I had them pick up the milk every day because I couldn't get it all in 2 days. Still going back to your question, I ended up milking in a milking parlor where the cows came to me, 8 at a time I was milking, and I had the radio going all the time, and I actually had a TV in one corner of the parlor. So I would, Betty would accuse me of I would pretty much up on the news because I'd watch the early news, and then the the 7 o'clock news, and by the time I finished them, I would know all the latest fashions and what the new cars look like and everything else. So those are just some of the, I was talking a little bit about black dirt. In, I'm going to say the 80s, the concept of minimal till and no-till became more widespread. Part of that was the herbicides that were developed. When I first started farming for corn, atrazine was the only product that, and 2,4-D, but it was, then you came out with, I'm going to say 30 different herbicides you could use on the corn, specific to sometimes just specific weeds, but grasses or broadleaf, to the point that you almost needed a whole degree just to understand how the herbicides work. But that made it possible that you didn't need to have 40-inch rows for the horse to go down. You could have it narrower and have basically the soil sterilized for weeds, but on an annual basis. Just collecting my thoughts a little bit.
Talk just a little bit about carryover rate.
Oh, atrazine was a product that in fact, if you applied more than what is said on the label, you would not have to put a herbicide down the next year. And this was before the research was done that atrazine, in fact, goes down in the soil and contaminated some groundwater. I know of a farmer that put on so much atrazine, this is before regulations, that he didn't have to do anything for the next 3 years. He had really sterilized, and it was those kind of things that in fact made the laws that we now have in the concerns out there. You know, at the time that he did it, none of us knew that well, it certainly was not on the label, but this person, and it worked. He had clean crops. This is the point where, Betty, you say.
What do I say?
What?
What do I say now? I think the thing I was saying was that then the next year you had some limitations in what you could plant.
Yeah, if in the case of atrazine, you could not plant soybeans then the next year. And there are some herbicides that in use now, you have either a year's time or certainly a crop's period of time that you can't plant, for example, soybeans after corn or peas or some other things.
With atrazine, wouldn't you have to plant the same crop every year?
You would have to plant corn every year until that time was up. One of the stories that I like to tell is one of the very last harvests that I had. My brother was helping me, and we were combining about 10 o'clock at night, and he had a cell phone, a flip phone, and the combine, when it went through a washout in the field, it went down and it had picked up a rock, and the rock went into the combine, but in the kind of combine that we had, a door opened when there was an object that came in that was not a corn. And so the door would open, and you'd stop the machine, and you'd go out, and you would dig out any corn that was stuck in there, and close the door, and you'd go ahead. So my brother, and you'd go up in front of the combine with it stopped, and he threw the corn back, but he had the phone in his pocket like this. So the cavity is open now, or is empty. And he went up and did that and closed the door, and we started the combine up, and he realized after we went from here to the gas station and back that he didn't have his phone anymore. Now, did he really have it in his pocket? That was the first question. So we went back and checked in the truck, and we went and checked where he had done this another place in the field. We checked there where it had the problem, and we couldn't find it. And I'm with my phone, I'm calling him. It's 10 o'clock at night, and we're doing all this, and we gave up. After an hour of doing this in the dark, we gave up. And we finished the field that night. We were done with the process. I'm cleaning out the combine. I'm opening by hand, opening this door, and corn falls out. And on the bottom of the corn pile, I've now put the combine away. I go back cleaning up the corn pile, and the bottom is his phone. It had fallen into this cavity where the rocks would normally go, and it was on the bottom, so it was protected. So it wasn't damaged at all. So I call him up, and he says, "This is my phone." He says to me, "You're calling on my phone. How can you do that?" And I said, "Well, it went through the combine." He said, "I got to call Sprint." Well, it had just gone into that cavity and was protected there. That I'm at the end of my notes there, Betty.
I think that's good enough. Let them ask.
What's the difference between hay and straw?
Hay is what you actually feed the livestock. Straw would be the byproduct of a small grain like wheat or oats that is left over that the animal would actually lay on. Now, when I went to my new barn, I had my cows had really easy living. I installed water beds for my cows that they laid on, so the mattress was only that thick, but when it was enough to give a cushion. Instead of laying on the cement, the cows actually laid on water beds. And so I had, the barn held 65 cows, but you could milk more than that. That's how I got 90. And so I didn't need straw. I used sawdust for a while. What else did I use for?
Sand.
Sand? Yeah. And I actually had a system that was had a liquid manure system that the cows, there was a building with a 12-foot space underneath it. It was Woodbury's largest pool. So it was 100 feet long, 40 feet wide, 12 feet high. So the manure would go there by simply, the floor had cracks in it, had slots in it. So by the cows moving their feet, that's what kept the floor clean. I would pump it out. My cows did not read the manual that said this is enough capacity for 60 cows for a year. And I had to pump at the very end of the fall and the first time in the spring. It would be full.
So tell about the Halloween storm. So the guy was there pumping.
Yeah. I hired a person to come in and pump this. It's a liquid. It's a very heavy, thick chocolate malt kind of mixture. And it was the Halloween storm. The person was there pumping it out. A lot of us didn't know how much of a storm that was going to be, and his equipment froze up in that. Uh-oh. Tell her I'll call her back. And so that was a pretty exciting winter, because I was very excited to see the spring. It was not the ideal situation. So The liquid manure was injected into the ground. The machine was actually, it would have knives that went down in the ground and covered right up. So the smell was there, but more from just the mixing than actually putting it on top of the ground. The first time I did this, there was a person in Woodbury that called and said the sewer's backed up. And I had a good friend in Public Works and who came out to this annoyed person, and when he opened the door of his car, he knew immediately what sewer was backed up. And his response to the complaint person was that the Schillings were here first, and that in fact we were handling it the best way possible at that time. So it really, Herb.
No? Okay, I just wanted to ask you, can you tell everybody what businesses are there where your farm is today so they have a good idea where your farm is?
So in 2014, we had an opportunity that came to us to sell part of the farm to senior housing. And it took a year and a half, and we sold to St. Therese, and my brother lives at St. Therese, and that only involved 17 acres of the farm. I should back up here at this point. So we owned 160 on the south side of Bailey Road, and we owned 40 acres on the north side of Bailey Road that was developed. It was a gravel pit. Anybody that knows the history there, that it was an ongoing gravel pit for about 15 years. And it was the first land that, because of the district that it was in, that was developed into houses. So the opportunity came along for selling some of our land to St. Therese. Took my brother's house and part of the trees around our place. That opened up the opportunity to, it meant the sewer was extended to our place and some of the other infrastructure. That opened up some other opportunities. So right now, there is a 300-unit apartment that is getting close to being completed on the property. There are twin homes, there's single-family homes, there's a purchase agreement for more single-family homes, and there's a piece of commercial land right by Bailey Road. There's a pond that the Schilling family built next to Bailey Road as required for the development. And the only...
That sounds like you dug it.
No, that's not the case. So we paid to have it dug and making the other, it was required because none of the water from our farm is supposed to be going off of our farm. You still have that structure in there for the 100-year storm or however often the big storms come along. But the water is supposed to stay on the farm. It's the only thing that's really left of the, so we, at the time of the sale, we probably had close to 100 trees, non-apple trees. We still had 100 apple trees on the farm. All of those trees except maybe a dozen pine trees are gone, and one oak tree. I asked to have the first tree that you came to on the farm left there. These were trees that were well over 150 years old, like this. It was a lifestyle that we really enjoyed, with the history that came with that. And it was a very hard decision. But when you're 70 years old and you're offered the offers that we've been made, I think it was a good decision, especially when you look back and there's nobody in the family, extended family, or that had any interest in continuing. And it was not a case of, well, you're going to stay farming and have everything built around you. It just, I've had enough grocery carts out in my field. I've had a bowling ball that was, that got up almost ready to go in the combine. I've had bicycles that have been left out in the field that some kid stole from or used from somebody else and then put it there. I've had next to housing, I've had people who thought that it was all right to put a garden out in my field. And I've had people complain that did that and then said that their garden didn't grow because I had put a herbicide out there. You know, it killed the cabbage. Well, it wasn't a cabbage field. So would I ask any of my children to do that? In the life that we now have, no, I really care about my kids, and I would not ask them to do that.
You want to talk about the Miller barn?
Okay, so I was sharing that I got to be the president of the Woodbury Heritage Society because I took a bathroom break and I came back and they said, congratulations, it was a clean run campaign. And it appears at this point I have to really get sick or die to, anyway, we have been working, and I hope most of you know a little bit about the Miller Barn. The city bought some open space, I'm going to say 10 years ago, doesn't matter. And on that open space was a barn. The Heritage Society went and toured the open spaces that the city had bought. We saw the barn and we said, what are you going to do with it? And they said, well, pretty much like the community club that we had and some other, what we thought historic sites, we'll probably tear them down. And we started the campaign at that point to save the Miller Barn. It is located on 60 acres of open space on Valley Creek and what they call Settlers Ridge. So tomorrow, we've had campaigns. Last year we had what we call the White Party, which we had a tent put up and everybody dressed in white. And it was a fundraising campaign that we put on. But before that, we had people come in and first they appraised the barn and they said, yes, it's structurally sound too. In fact, if you put a new roof on and fix up some of the boards and paint it, it's a sound structure. So we then went through the process of having 6 different companies look at what it would cost to do that. One company was from Mankato, and we engaged that person into being the person to do this. Then at that time, state senator came along, and one of the people associated with the Woodbury Heritage had made connections with her, and she said, I think I can introduce a bill to get monetary support through the Preservation Act that the state has to help with this. And we as a group sat there with our mouths open like, really? Yeah. And so we went through the process of going to the state legislatures, the House and the representative committees and appealing to them to financially support. End of a long story for that segment is that in fact they did, she applied for a grant for $400,000. We got 160 given to us in 2 segments. And that money was to be administered through the city. They were going to be actually getting the money and paying the bills. And So, okay, we'll do this, and we've jumped through a whole bunch of hoops to get to the point where the contractor was supposed to start in July, last July. He had gotten the shingles, and the roofing contract that he had subcontracted, there was a hole in the roof about this big, had been there long enough that it was in fact deteriorating on the floor of the barn. The barn was the kind of a pole barn that the hay was stored on one level, and underneath was where the cows and the horses were kept. And it had been leaking long enough that in fact it was deteriorating some of those floorboards. How do I speed this up?
Speed up by saying that contract didn't work out.
Yeah, that contractor, there were two issues. The roofer did not have liability insurance. How do you roof a barn that's 40 feet up in the air without insurance? And since we're working with the city, there is a state law that you pay the prevailing wages where the work is done. So if you, and this contractor was from Mankato, and the difference for a worker in Mankato and in Woodbury is about $15 an hour. So his bid was on his workers from Mankato coming up and working, even though we thought we had made it clear that he had to bid with the new prevailing wages. That was not going to work out. And anyway, we, in October, we went back to square one, which means that we had to put the job out on for people to bid on, and we are in that process now. We are talking about, well, the city at that point went and put shingles on the roof. Tarp. Well, no, it's actually asphalt shingles over the hole. It would have been so helpful if they had done that 3 years before. But, you know, we're happy that it happened, and we now have a little bit more time. But we have this state fund that if we don't do something pretty soon, so we're hoping this summer. So anyway, I'm going to pass these out. These are about the event that's going to happen tomorrow. Let's see. Let's try this. I think I got a couple more. So we are having our annual meeting tomorrow, and then we're having if you have some, just pass them over there. There's people that have put together, and I'm comparing it to Lincoln logs. We are going to construct a 1/5 size barn tomorrow afternoon at the Woodbury Library. That's approximately like this long and this wide and this high, of the identical what our barn would, not exactly to our barn, but another barn that was built in the 1920s. So it's free. I've got the ice cream there already. I also have, I'll just have them up here when you leave, applications if you want to be part of us. But you're part of this down here, and that's fine. We're happy. We're all part of the same county.
Well, you mentioned you used to be a member here.
Yeah,
You were a member here.
yeah, by being part of, before I was elected up there.
Yeah, years gone by.
Is that it?
I'll answer any other questions. We ran out of tape a long time ago.
Thanks, guys.
Mike?
Thank you so much, Wayne. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great